Welcome back to the Real Recovery Show. We meet here every Friday at noon, and all of our episodes are on themeetingspace.com. You just click on the Real Recovery Show, and we have a couple of dozen episodes at least so far. Anyway, all of our episodes are very interesting from a wide variety of topics. Sometimes we talk about different modalities to heal from addiction and PTSD. And sometimes we talk about either different addictions that people may not even think that they have, from food addiction to sex addiction to codependency. We've talked about challenges that people have had with maybe their sexual preferences, being maybe of the LGBT community. And when we talked about, healing and overcoming and facing things like going to prison for a long sentence or relationship issues and etc. Today is a really good topic. I've seen a lot of people who have struggled with the concept of God, and when they go to a 12-step program, and have told me that, they would do a 12-step program if that wasn't there. And I've seen people struggle in the rooms. When I would talk to people, at the meeting space, we have a wide variety of meetings. And one of the meetings that we ended up having for a period of time, which we may end up having again, never know, is the 12 secular steps. And that meeting was based on a book that was written that was focused on helping people to see another way to do the 12 steps without having to believe in an official, overt God concept. But within the 12 steps, if you are somebody who struggles with the concept of God, there's a wide variety of beliefs and paths within it. It's very inclusive, not exclusive. It allows for people to find themselves and to find their way. I've known people who were anything from complete atheist all the way to returning to their religion of their childhood, to trying a whole new religion, to switching to Buddhism when they learned how to meditate, to kind of being in a more like I don't know kind of state and being in that for a bit. I know somebody that prayed to the god of strawberry limeade, and that seemed to work for her for a second. And I've heard people talk about praying and having a higher power that's a doorknob. I'm not sure. I have my own opinions about that. But then a lot of people, while they're finding their way, and they will make the group, GOD, group of drunks, into a higher power, on and on, right? And so from the outside in, people could get turned off because they see the word God and they say no way, or they come in, or they go into a meeting for 12-step recovery and they see the word God on the 12 steps on the wall and they say no way. Or maybe they say, maybe I could just skip that and just do the rest of it. And and how well is that going to work? And trying to find a sponsor in the program that will be able to help them to be able to do that. And it's a struggle. Sometimes people go through that and they end up, healing their story and find that that the fellowship and their intuition is really their higher power as a collective consciousness. On and on. So this show is really important because here we get to talk to somebody who's walked through and this is somebody who I find to be very intelligent and not somebody who wants to wallow in ignorance. This is somebody who will, if something's bothering him, he wants to find out what really resonates for him and is clear to him so that he can succeed at what he's trying to do. And so I'd like to introduce my friend Andrew, who has 3+ years of sobriety, clean and sober off of alcohol and drugs. His sobriety date is October 15th, 2019. And I've known him for most of this sobriety. I've seen him through COVID. I've watched his struggles. I've walked with him a little bit with his court stuff, with his child. And I don't know, I've watched him go through a lot, and then I've seen from a distance some of the recent stuff that he's gone through, and I just feel like whatever you want to call it, I'll call it his spirit is strong. His desire and his passion is very focused, and this is somebody that I feel like works a very strong program, while the whole time finding out what to do with his I want to say issue or confusion, conflict with the God concept. So at this point, I'm going to introduce Andrew, who's going to tell us a little bit about his childhood growing up and take us through his journey.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you having me here. My name's Andrew. I'm an alcoholic, drug addict, whatever you want to call it. If you take a look back at my life, there were really no external factors from my childhood that would indicate that I would wind up being a drug addict, being an alcoholic, sitting in this chair one day. I had a textbook upbringing. I came from a upper middle class family. I was the youngest of 3 children. There was always food on the table. Addiction doesn't run rampant in my family. I had every one of my needs met for my entire life. But I always knew that I was a little different. I grew up with an over-exaggerated sense of guilt, shame, and fear that stuck with me for most of my childhood. To give you an example, my parents wanted me in the gifted and talented program when I was a child. But since my birth date falls at the end of the year, the school said I had to be tested, I had to be psychologically evaluated in order to be accepted into the program. And I passed the evaluation. I was deemed above average intelligence as a 4-year-old. And I remember going into pre-kindergarten knowing I was the only person that had to do that in order to be there. I remember looking around, automatically feeling like I was somehow separate from everybody else. And again, that feeling of guilt, shame, and fear has stuck with me since then. Being that I wasn't zoned for that school, we had to lie and use my uncle's address to live in the neighborhood. So every day from K through 5, I went to school under the assumption that somebody was going to find out that we were lying about where we lived so I could go to the school. Not to mention, being the youngest of 3 children, I was always dropped off last, and considering my mother was not a very punctual person, I showed up to school late every single day. So you mix those two things together, and I grew up with this overwhelming sense that I was just this terrible person. I either had to be put in a position to where I had to lie or just keep my mouth shut. And it was just a significant amount of stress for a child to have on his shoulders for most of it. And for a while there, I resented my parents. And I resented a few people, the people I lived with, the people I loved, the people that care about me. And as I got older, more or less in the last few years, I realized my brother and my sister went through the exact same thing. How come my brother and my sister aren't an addict or an alcoholic? And I just come to accept that this is who I am. The best thing that I could come up with, and this cost me several $1,000s and many years of therapy, many hours of therapy of my life, that I'm deemed a highly sensitive person. It's very uncommon in men. It's I think it's 1 in 20 of the entire population, and of that 1 in 20, 1 out of 5 are men. Now,
it's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. I've learned to use it to my advantage, but until I learned what that was and knew what that was, It was more of a curse. It was just this cascading feeling of guilt, shame, fear, and remorse all the time.
Yeah. So I just want to take a moment and let you know why he's wearing a mask, because I forgot to do that before. Is it to protect his anonymity in the program at the level of press, radio, TV, and films? That's why he's wearing a mask. Okay. Thank you for that. Continue.
So I just grew up, and it was almost like being in a forge, like just engulfed in flames all the time. And a few things came about that. One of them was a hyper sense of self-awareness. I was always considering what I looked like, what I sounded like, what my appearance was like, and anywhere I was. And that guilt, shame, remorse, and fear followed me throughout my entire childhood. But I was a good kid. I got straight A's. I was a straight A student. My brother and sister couldn't say that. I never got in trouble. My brother couldn't say that. And I was the golden child, the youngest of 3, spoiled. But I always did the right thing. I never hung out with the wrong crowds. I always did what I felt was the best thing to do. And it wasn't until I was, I believe I was a junior in high school, was the first time that I tried alcohol. And I was a proud graduate of the DARE program growing up. I vowed to never drink. I vowed to never do drugs. Had no intention of ever doing them. Didn't want to do them. Didn't want to hang out with that crowd. But I remember trying alcohol because my brother had joined the Marines. He was home on leave. And I think it was like Thanksgiving break somewhere in there. And he thought it would be funny to get me drunk. So I had 3 beers with him. And I remember feeling like light, a little light on my feet, a little woozy. And in my head, I'm like, you know what? This is what everybody does. Like, this isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Like, I'm not really enjoying this. But I remember reaching for the 4th one, and my brother saying, no, that's it. You're only getting 3. And my automatic response was, what do you mean I'm only getting 3? I just wanted to keep doing it. And I remember that night, he had to sneak me past my mother. Not that I was belligerently drunk or anything, but he snuck me past my mother so she wouldn't find out about it. And I'm laying in bed thinking about it, like, I didn't really enjoy the taste. I didn't really enjoy the feeling, but I loved the feeling that I just did something I wasn't supposed to, and I got away with it. It was something about that deviant behavior that just appealed to me. It made me feel alive on the inside. It made that guilt, shame, fear, and remorse just at least temporarily go away. And I only drank when my brother was around, while he was home on leave, which wasn't too often. But the one time that my drinking became problematic, or consequential rather, was my senior year of high school. It was at a homecoming game, the football game, and I was dating a girl at the time. And again, I had no intention of drinking, no intention of doing drugs, no intention of hanging out with the wrong crowd. We go to the football game, and she brandishes a water bottle with vodka in it. And the security guard was like checking everybody's water bottles. So she's like, hey, I drink this real quick. And in my head, I'm saying, I don't want that. I'm going to get sick if I drink that. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm not going to enjoy it. And I run through a list, reason after reason of why I shouldn't do this. And the last reason that came to my head was, Andrew, if you don't do this girl's not going to like you, and she's not going to date you. And before I knew it, that entire bottle was gone. And that was just my thought process. I can come up with every reason not to do something or to do something, but that last reason is what gets me. It just shuts down that part of my brain that's capable of proper judgment.
How profound.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit and talk about the concept of a higher power. I don't mean to jump around, but it's relevant to what I just said. Now, I don't necessarily believe that a God or a higher power is necessary. I'll explain that later, but it's more or less, it just can't be me. The underlying principle behind it is that it can't be me, because modern psychology and neurology tell me that I have a disease that centers in the survival part of my brain. The survival part of my brain is only capable of 2 things, pleasure and pain. And it's only capable of thinking for the next 15 seconds. And if I only think about what I think, and being a neurotic person, only thinking about guilt, shame, fear, and remorse, eventually all of my decision making will be based on whether I'm trying to seek pleasure or avoid pain. And if I do that for an extended period of time, I'm going to miss out on what it means to be human. And I will eventually go right back into survival mode, because the addiction affects the survival aspect of the human brain. Now, jumping back to what I said. I got suspended for that because I got belligerently drunk at that football game, and I passed out in the bathroom. The cops were called. My parents came. I was suspended for a week. The only reason I wasn't expelled was because I had a 4.0 GPA at the time. And I vowed to never do that again. So that was a stupid decision. I'll never do that again. And my parents were more than happy to agree with it. They thought I was put up to it because I was the golden child. And in essence, I wasn't put up to it. It was a decision that I made. I might have had a lapse in judgment at the point, but it was a decision that I made. I wasn't put up to doing it. And that was that. I made it through the rest of the school year, and I never got in trouble, never really drank. But I was working at a doctor's office at the time, at the end of my senior year. I was the captain of the bowling team at the time, and I had developed wrist tendonitis. And the doctor, or one of the nurses says, "Here, take this for your pain." And not knowing what it was, I took it. Turns out it was Tramadol, which back in 2005 wasn't even considered a controlled substance. It was just something that the drug reps could bring in and just bring bags of it. Now it's, I believe, a Schedule II substance. Mm-hmm. But just to give you a frame of reference, you'd have to take like 30 of these in order to get a high. And don't get me wrong, I did that. But I remember the first time I took the pills. I took them as prescribed. I took 2. It made the pain go away. And I was hanging out with my cousin at the time. And we're playing basketball, and all of a sudden, I start feeling light again. I start feeling a degree of pleasure. All the noise, all like being overly sensitive, like I get sensory overload easily. Mm-hmm. So if the wind is blowing too hard, or if there's construction in the area, or if it's too hot, it just gets very noisy. And I remember all of that just starting to slowly slip away as the drug took effect. And then I got my first like addictive thought. Excuse me. And it wasn't a rational thought. And by rational, I mean something that I came up with on my own. My definition of an irrational thought is something that just pops up into my head. And the thought was, if 2 of these made you feel the way you feel, imagine what 4 of them would do.
Math. It's just math.
And I took 2 more. And before I knew it, I was experiencing euphoria, utopia. Where has this feeling been my entire life? And the thought, this was a rational thought, saying, I want to feel like this all the time. I want to protect this. So I was able to secure it. At the time, it felt like I had a seemingly endless supply of it because I was getting it from a doctor. And at no point did I think that I was doing drugs, because it came from a doctor, it came from somebody I trusted. And I don't blame the doctor. I don't blame the nurses. That was all a product of my ignorance and my not knowing. And had it not been for that experience, I would have found it in another form somewhere else down the road. Just try to stay accountable on that. So the last 2 months of my high school career, I went to school high every day. I was taking, like I said, up to 30 of them at a time because I had a seemingly endless supply. And I remember growing up as a DARE student, like I mentioned, and they tell you all of the bad things that are going to happen when you do drugs. But one place where DARE failed was they don't tell you all of the great things that happen when you first do drugs.
Yeah.
The honeymoon period. I don't remember learning that when I was in 5th grade, because I was able to sleep without an issue. I could talk to people without an issue. My grades actually improved while I was on drugs the first few months. And it just kept reinforcing my doing it because I had nothing but positive things coming from it. And I just wanted to feel like that for the rest of my life. I stopped working that job when I was a freshman in college. And right around that time was when things started to become problematic for me, because I was used to public school where you simply just show up, put your name on the top of papers, turn them in when you're supposed to, and you get an A or a B. And in college, it's not like that. There's a degree of self-discipline that's necessary in order to succeed. And that had never been put to the test for me, because I always had teachers, I always had my parents standing over me, making sure I did what I was supposed to do. And in college, I didn't have that, because when I learned that they don't take attendance in some classes, I stopped going to them. And it wasn't because I was like, oh, I'm going to cheat the system, or I'm really going to show them. I just lacked that. It wasn't inside of me to just go to class when I didn't have to. And over the course of the first 2 years, my grades started to suffer. And one day I remember I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down. I'm really going to try. I'm coming off graduating 7th in my high school class. I know I have what it takes to succeed in college. And I tried, and it didn't get better. It really didn't. I was so far behind in so many different areas. And my focus still wasn't on academics. It was on the social components of college, because I wasn't a social person in high school. I more than made up for that when I was in college. But it used to be so natural to me, and it wasn't anymore. And I didn't have the skills necessary in order to succeed. And I started failing. And I learned this maybe within the last 3 years. But my first drug of choice wasn't alcohol. It wasn't the drugs that I mentioned earlier. My first drug of choice was my parents' validation. Because I always felt empty, except when I made my parents happy. And I remember right after I moved here to Las Vegas when I was in 9th grade. And I remember I got my first straight A report card. It came in the mail a week after school ended my freshman year. And my mother opened up the report card, and she started crying. And I thought she was upset with me because she looked at it. I didn't get to see what was written on it yet. And then I found out that these were tears of joy. And the sheer elation that came over me, again, took away all of that pain, all of that anxiety, shame, guilt, fear, and remorse, just immediately removed from me. And I had to come to terms recently with the fact that I didn't get good grades because I'm some kind of genius. I'm not saying I'm not a genius. I'm just saying that's not the reason I got good grades. I got good grades because just like anything else, it was a chase. It was a chase to make my parents happy so they'd be proud of me and I could feel that validation. Now in college, I failed. I started failing classes and that validation was gone. For the first time in my life, I did not have what it takes to get that validation. And I started to suffer some kind of identity crisis. And I still had not put it together that the tramadol that I was taking was the reason why I felt good. It's obvious, but it just didn't occur to me. And I remember one of my friends from high school happened to be like going through some stuff at the time, and he's like, "Hey, I'm gonna go get some heroin. You want to try it?" And again, in my head, that's a terrible idea. It's illegal. It's addictive. And again, all these reasons why I shouldn't do it. And one of the main reasons was I'm not sticking a needle in my arm. And I remember them saying, "Oh, no, this doesn't involve a needle. You can smoke it." And all of a sudden, every issue surrounding the use of heroin was just gone. And I did it. I went into the second floor of the garage at UNLV, and I was in my friend's car, and I tried it. And within seconds, all of that guilt, shame, fear, and remorse was just removed from me. It was like magic. And I had that same thought. I want to feel like this all the time. The difference between that and 2 years prior when I first tried drugs was my life was not decent when I tried them. My life didn't improve. My emotions improved, but I still had all of the consequences of not going to school, not doing what I was supposed to do, following me. So that happens, and I still don't have my parents' validation. I don't have my parents' trust because they don't know what I'm doing anymore. But at least I'm feeling okay on the inside. And I did. I did heroin for about 3 months. I finished that school year, and I was doing it over the summer. And I remember getting the notion like I should probably stop doing this. Like this isn't the right thing to do. Like my friends aren't doing this. I'm finding myself in odd neighborhoods doing things that I don't normally do. I should probably stop. So I threw away all of my supplies, and within, I'm going to say 12 hours, I was right back to doing it again.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it at the time. And that's when I just kind of gave up. Like a little part of me died. A little part of me thinking that life is beautiful and it's going to work out for everybody. It's like all of those I'm not going to say lies, but all those fairy tales were taught growing up. It was like a lot of my dreams had been crushed at that point. And I said, this is just life. I'm just destined to suffer. And eventually I stopped. My family had my brother had moved back from being in the Marines. My sister moved back from New York. And we were all together for the first time in 4 or 5 years. So we decided to go on a family vacation on a cruise. And I had not read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, specifically under more about alcoholism, the list of things that we tried. Because my genius mind, I say, we're going on a trip out of the country. I just won't bring anything with me. I won't have access to it. And while that did work, technically, I wound up ruining the trip for my entire family. Because no parent, no brother, no sister wants to find out that the little brother who grew up right next to them, graduated 7th in their high school class is a heroin addict. But when I got back, I did an IOP because I spent that week detoxing cold turkey. And I was put right back into a structured environment. Show up at this time, do exactly this, and you will get this outcome. And I thrived. I know grades aren't assigned in chemical dependency in intensive outpatient programs, but if they were, I would have gotten an A. And I said,
Totally
I got
get
this.
that.
This is easy. Follow this simple set of rules, and you will get this exact outcome. And I did. Part of that program was going to Narcotics Anonymous, which at the time, there was no meeting space in Las Vegas. in order to go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at that point in time, you had to go to some rather bad neighborhoods. So I show up to a place that's, I think it was on Weston or Highland, like somewhere nestled in between the strip clubs. And again, I'm still the 19-year-old college student. I walk into these meetings, and I had already gotten the benefits of, like, the physical component of addiction had been alleviated of me. The detox was done. My body improved. My thoughts started to improve a little bit. So I first show up to Narcotics Anonymous meeting in that area, in a decrepit building, and I see all these middle-aged to older people. I'm by far the youngest, the only person in college. I'm the only person who doesn't have a divorce. I'm the only person who has never been to prison. I'm the only person who has all of my teeth. And we get to how it works, and they say, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. And I look at that description I just gave of the other people in the room, and I say,
no, thank
why
you.
would I want what you have? There is nothing you have that I want. There are things that I have that you probably want, but no, I don't want anything from you. So I did 90 meetings in 90 days because it was required of me with that program. And when it was over, I just said, I'm going to go back to my life. I have my junior year of college waiting for me. I'm sure I could woo my girlfriend into getting back with me. My parents started to trust me again. My brother and sister started to trust me again. I started working again. And I went back to school, and I accomplished every one of those things without using drugs. I graduated from college. I wound up getting married. I bought a house. I had a great job in the Strip at the time. And again, this wasn't a cognitive thought I had, but like, why would I have wanted to stay in that program if I'm able to achieve this without going to Narcotics Anonymous? Any of that. And everything was fine. I think it was about 5.5 years went by from the moment I stopped using heroin until the part where I'm about to discuss. In June of 2011, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And there was like a little bit of denial with me, like, obviously nobody wants cancer. Obviously it's a fatal disease. It requires a lot of treatment, the effects of the treatment. Like, I knew all that. But it didn't quite occur to me that my mother was going to die, like, sooner rather than later. But she put up a great fight. She went through the treatment the first time. She was put, I don't know if it was qualified as remission because it was stage 4, and I don't know if enough time had lapsed, but she was in good shape. She was stable. And I was fine. I was happy as a clam. And right after I got married, my father found out that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Wow.
And we're talking, this is maybe like an 18-month gap.
Wow.
This was in the beginning of 2013. And right about then I got that same feeling from the first time I tried to quit drugs. Like, everything I thought life was going to be was just crushed. And again, with that hyper sense of self-awareness that I had as a child, I'm like, why am I going through this? Why is this happening to my family? Why doesn't this happen to people who don't do the right thing, who aren't genuine people? Why? And it was like muscle memory. I went right back to doing drugs. I don't remember having that cognitive thought. I don't feel good. Drugs make me feel good. I'm going to do drugs. That was never a thought in my head. It just kind of happened. And I used drugs for the next year to cope with that, the deterioration, decline, and eventual deaths of my parents. My father died September 16th of 2014. My mother died December 4th of 2014, so about 3 months apart. And I wound up getting clean on December 23rd, 2014. And all that was left was my wife, my brother, and my sister. Well, we were all we had at the time. And everybody was so focused on recovering from the aftermath of my parents' deaths that nobody was really too focused on me. So all I did was go back to the same outpatient program that I did when I was 19, the exact same one with the same counselor. And I remember this was a rational thought. I remember telling my wife this because she's saying, you need to do something more different. You need to be a little more involved. You need to make this a part of your life. And I said, well, I was able to go 5 years without using. I only relapsed because my parents died.
Right.
My parents cannot die twice.
Right.
So I'm just going to do exactly what I did before.
Right.
And I'm not going to run into that same roadblock because it's physically impossible for that to happen.
Seems reasonable.
Right.
Sure.
The flawless logic.
Right. Just looking at the form of it. Sure.
So I did just that. I did the IOP again, scored there were no grades, but I would have gotten an A. And I did a smattering of AA meetings. I wasn't going back to NA. I did a few AA meetings, and eventually, it just...
What was the reason for going to AA instead of NA?
I didn't want to go back to NA, just because of what I had seen.
Okay.
Not that I'd seen anything bad, but it was just...
Your
it was
own
such
experience.
A shock to me.
Yeah, gotcha.
And a few people that I had met in the IOP the second time were going to AA, and I trusted them, so I just went with them.
Okay.
But here's the caveat to that. As long as I'm in AA, I'm a drug addict. Mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with alcohol. So as long as I'm in AA, I don't have to accept any of what's being told to me because none of this applies to me.
I totally get that because I've had multiple addictions. And so when I thought of going to a specific 12-step program, it's like, well, sure, but I didn't bottom necessarily from one thing. And so my childhood was being brought up around 12-step recovery, and I had been brought to meetings when I was little. And I don't know, I just felt like I was able to understand concepts and read literature and, take what I like and leave the rest. But I had a level of trying to find whether or not a level of detachment from it. Not really ascribing to any one particular belief system or fully going to any particular program or something like that. So I could see how someone can be in a program and not really in the program because of that. So anyway, so thanks for that. At this point, we're going to take a break. Please remember that the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them, do not represent any 12-step program, or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. See you in a bit. Welcome back to The Real Recovery Show. Remember, you can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app, or you can get our podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and you can go to themeetingspace.com, click on The Real Recovery Show, and see all of our episodes there. If you are contemplating being on a future episode, click on The Real Recovery Show, and under the latest episode, you'll see an intake link where you can, an intake form link where you could fill it out and let us know what you would like to talk about and your experience, etc. Or maybe recommend somebody else. You can also contact us through the contact form on the website as well. Okay, so we're back to listening to Andrew's story.
Thank you. All right, so that second relapse ended. I went to the IOP, did a few meetings, and I was able to amass 18 months of abstinence. I don't call it sobriety. I don't call it recovery anymore because I wasn't putting in any work for it. Mm-hmm. There was a third relapse, and then that's kind of what the second and the third relapse, and that's kind of what brought me to this attempt at recovery. I never worked the program, never felt the need to. In a little bit, I'll explain why. But the last time I relapsed, I had 2 years and 9 months of abstinence. And I remember I was going through some kind of physical health issue at the time. And I was feeling a really nasty pain in my side, the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life. And instead of going to the hospital, which would cost, $1,500, $2,000, I thought it would be a genius idea to just take a painkiller instead. So I did.
Not finding out what the cause of the pain was, or you knew?
I would had like set doctor's appointments for the future, and I was just kind of waiting for them to happen.
Okay, gotcha.
But I felt like I was going to die. I wanted anything and everything in the world to just not feel like that anymore. And I remember sitting there with the bottle of painkillers in my hand. They were my wife's that were left over from surgery she had. And I remember coming up with that list, why I shouldn't do this. If I do this, it's going to turn into something more than just a painkiller. If I do this, I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to lose custody of my child. I'm going to lose everything that I'd ever worked for. And as I'm telling myself these things, my hands are opening the bottle, taking the pills out, putting them in my mouth, and swallowing them. And within a few weeks, I was back to it, as if I had never stopped. And if you put all of my time spent in active addiction back to back, I've only spent 2 years of my life in active addiction. I've spent an overwhelming majority of my life in abstinence. But I never worked the program.
Dry, right.
It was just dry. And that's a terrible way to live.
Yeah.
We have a disease that's either going to be treated with drugs or with recovery, and I was treating it with neither. And it's just a miserable existence.
Yeah.
And given that I was put into it when I was 19 years old, I just thought that's how life was. I thought people were just meant to be miserable. I thought every guy hated their wife. I thought everybody woke up to storm clouds. I thought everybody hated going to work. I thought that was normal. So midway through that relapse, was 97 days long. Midway through, my wife finds out about it, asks me to leave. And there were a few precipitating events that led to me getting clean this time. It ended in handcuffs is really all I care to say right now. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into it. It's a good story, though. If you ever want to see me outside, I'll tell you about it. But I wound up going to jail. I got a DUI and a possession charge. And as soon as I got out of jail, I was put on a plane by my brother, sister, and then wife, and I went to rehab in New Jersey. And while I'm sitting there in detox, I'm thinking about all of these things, like, all I've ever done was try to be a good person, a genuine person. Like I'm a good father, I'm a good husband, I'm a good brother. I was always a good son. Like I never led with the intent to do anything wrong. Yet I always find myself in this situation. Why? And it was just kind of struck into me that I can't do this alone. And that's when I kind of informally worked my step one. Like I've known I had a problem since I was 19. I never denied that I was an addict. I accepted it. But I never admitted, or I never really understood what unmanageable meant. Because like I said, I thought that's just what life was. I thought it was that difficult for everybody. And life is unmanageable for two reasons. One, either it becomes so out of hand that nobody can manage it, or I'm just not built to manage a life. And I learned over time that it's the latter of the two. I am not built to manage a life. Regardless of how sumptuous or difficult it is, I cannot do it alone. So that was what was different for me the fourth time I looked at step one, acknowledging that I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
And we look into step two, the insanity component. I never worked step two because I never thought I was insane. Like when I need a particular substance put in my body and I can't get it, yes, I'm insane. That I thought insanity was limited to just that.
Right.
But if we look at what I said, the coming up with a list of reasons why I shouldn't do things, and then that one small factor telling me why I should, and then going for that, that's insanity. Not to mention, I used to be a school teacher, and during the summers, I would experience that insanity because I'd have nothing to do. And I would just have hundreds of unfinished projects laying around the house, and I was constantly rearranging furniture in the rooms and painting this and remodeling that, just kind of always moving, just to get rid of that feeling of guilt, shame, fear, remorse, and anxiety. And I realized that in accordance with not being able to do this alone, maybe my thought process isn't the healthiest. Because I would always revert back to, I was able to stay clean for 5 years by choosing not to do it. For 18 months by choosing not to do it. For 2 years and 9 months just by choosing not to do it. I have that willpower. I have that judgment. I can do it. And And it was when I was dealing with the cops the day that I got arrested, and they told me, you're being arrested. And I was just flabbergasted. And I said, how could you arrest me? Don't you know how good of a person I am?
Right.
And looking back on that once the drugs were out of my
Right.
system, just how insane that was.
Right.
To be so like in the
something
moment,
must be off.
right. To be willing to bet money that something is a certain way and to be completely wrong.
Yeah.
And that's when I kind of stopped trusting my own judgment temporarily for a little bit. And then we move into step 3 was when we first look at the mention of God. I came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could... I'm sorry, that's step 2. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. I grew up Catholic,
Okay.
Roman Catholic. I wasn't forced to go to church by any means, but like I went to religious instruction every Wednesday after school. I received all of the sacraments. I was married Catholic in a Catholic church, all of it. And I grew up with a God that was just damning, vengeful. I grew up with the fear that if I did something wrong, I was going to be punished for it by a power greater than myself. No matter how much I venture out into spirituality, anytime I hear the word God, I cannot differentiate between just the word that people use and the Roman Catholic God.
Right.
I just can't.
Right.
Even if we were to just examine the word God, the concept that there is somehow a superhuman somewhere in the world making decisions that specifically affect me, it just boggles my mind because I'm riddled with questions. And I'll get more into that later, but the way I work step 3 is there are things that are in my control and things that are not in my control. And as long as I have a clean mind and a clean body through abstinence, I can get up to that point and say, is this in my control? If it's not, I can just let it go and realize that it's not a reflection of me anymore because it's not in my control. And if it is in my control, what can I do about it? And it's
Kind of like
best,
the Serenity Prayer.
right, the living practice of the Serenity Prayer. And if there is something I can do about it, I've taught myself that I should probably not only go based off of what I think all the time, which is where having a sponsor comes in handy, having a support system. Because if I bounce one idea or for 10 different people, I'm going to get a response or a few responses, and one of them is going to sound good. I might even try it. And from there, one of two things will happen. It will either be a desirable outcome or an undesirable outcome. A desirable outcome is great. I move on. Undesirable outcome, and this is where humility is important, because if I'm faced with an undesirable outcome and I don't have humility, I don't have open-mindedness, I don't have honesty, I'm going to look at what that answer is or what the result is as a reflection of me.
Yeah.
And if it's undesirable, I'm naturally going to think that I failed. So I tend to look at things as opportunities and experiences. If there's an undesirable outcome, there's something I can learn from it.
Yeah.
To not make that mistake again. Or to learn from it and help somebody else not make that same mistake that I did. And we move into step 4. And I've worked the steps between both programs. So I'm just going to keep it based in the fear component. Because fear is congruent between the two step 4s, the AA step 4 and the NA step 4. And I learned that everything for my entire life, a lot of the negative consequences, a lot of the negative emotions all stem from one central fear, and that's the fear of inadequacy. I never thought I was good enough. Why? I don't know. I have no idea. In essence, it's not important anymore. But from that stems all of my defects. Why would I lie? Because the truth would show that I'm not good enough. Why would I manipulate? Because if I can convince you I'm good enough, whether or not it's true is irrelevant, but if I can convince you I'm good enough, I will be whole. Why will I set a stage? Because if I set a stage, then somebody will encounter what I have set, and they will come out of it the other side realizing that I'm adequate. Why would I be a perfectionist? Because being perfect is being adequate. And I used to think that the defects were just a product of being an addict. I did drugs for so long, therefore I have these defects. Whereas the flip side of that coin, and the truth is, I've had these defects all along. They just became more amplified when we throw drugs into the mix.
Right.
Because, like, if you asked me if I was a liar, for lack of a better term, hand to God, I would say, no, I'm not a liar, and I would mean that. But there are plenty of times where I was dishonest, not really knowing the difference between the two concepts. And all of my defects serve that purpose to protect me from that fear. So when we get into step 6 and 7 is when like one really has to start relying on God. And I remember reading the 2 paragraphs that explain step 6 and 7 in the AA book and thinking like, there's got to be more to this. And my sponsor at the time was like, no, we just pray, we give it to God, and God takes them away. And my immediate answer is, how?
Right.
and I wasn't given an answer. And I don't like that. When I'm in a position and I have a question and nobody has the answer to it, I immediately lose the faith in it. Just like when somebody says everything happens for a reason, unless the person knows what the reason is and intends on sharing that reason with me, saying everything happens for a reason is of no value to me, because I cannot reassess the situation with new information that I've just been given. It just does nothing for me. So working step 6 and 7 in NA was much more valuable to me, because it completely removes the component of a higher power. Not saying a higher power is not important, because it is, but it focuses on what's in my control to do something about this. So I learned that for every defect, there's an opposite and equal positive trait. So, and this is getting into like the spiritual principles. Instead of dishonesty, dishonesty. Instead of manipulation, there's working step 3. And each one has it. And I had to like learn what courage meant at the time, because I was still riddled with fear, and to a degree I still am. But if I'm used to doing something a particular way my entire life, I can't just overnight change that.
Right.
It's a progress. It's a process. It takes time. It takes practice. And I did. I was able to do that. I was able to take a lot of those defects from me. And I remember looking back on it like there was no like burning bush moment. There was no like lightning in the sky. Like it was just a product of the work that I put in. And I'm not trying to look down on anybody's beliefs, but if something happens for a reason, like it's got to be provable. Give you an example. I wound up losing my custody of my daughter. I was on the wrong side of that divorce battle, for reasons unimportant right now. But I remember from the moment I went to rehab, I kept track of everything. So I had inpatient rehab, outpatient rehab, individual counseling, and in the first 13 months, I think I went to like 400 or 500 meetings, and I had the paper signed at each of them. And I wasn't told to do that. I just did that on my own accord. And as a result, the felony possession charge was dismissed altogether. The DUI was reduced to a reckless, and I eventually got split custody of my daughter after having none. And I remember people telling me, oh, that's God working in your life. That's God working in your life. And this is when I started to question, is believing in a God to work my program really necessary? Because when somebody says, that's God working in your life, my response is it? Or is it just the natural result of doing everything I'm supposed to be doing what's in my control and not doing what's not in my control? Because there were plenty of things I wanted to do during that first 13 months that were not in my control, like trying to pad my chances. My thought process, I wanted to find out the names of everybody involved who would be making a decision on my case, send them flowers, write letters to them, and really try to manipulate the situation. But I didn't do that. I just lived by the spiritual principles that were set out for us.
But do you feel that through the process, when you're seeking what your next step is and you're making your decisions of what it is and you're asking people what, for insight and feedback, and you're looking at it, that on some level that you are intuiting, like you're doing what resonates? Do you feel like you're doing, because how do you know what the next right step is, other than, because like you said before, you can have 10 different people give you 10 different ideas, right? So there has to be something in you that says yes to one of them, right? Without calling it God, without calling it higher power, just you and how we are made up. We have gut feelings. We have something that makes sense to us on a deeper level, an intuition. Do you feel that played a part, in who to talk to, who to ask for help, etc.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It does say in the big book that deep down inside every man, woman, child is the fundamental belief of God. The way I interpret that is everybody has an internal guiding light. I think we as humans, everybody has the capability and the decency of being a good person. It's just a matter of being able to
I
find
agree.
that.
I think if the word God gets in the way of you being able to tune into that, then drop the word God, because if it's not helpful, it's hurtful.
Right.
You know, but yeah.
Well, to a degree, and I don't know the statistics, but to a degree, when this program was created, AA, like, the country looked a lot different than it does today. And in order for it to gain popularity, it was comprised of a component that appealed to people at the time. And in the 30s and the 40s, I imagine the country was much more religious, Judeo-Christian religious, than it is now.
Or at least that they acted like they were.
Right.
You know, internally, maybe not so much, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And so you got your custody back of your daughter.
right.
And then we're now at
Step 8.
we have well, that's good because we have 8 minutes left.
Okay. I'm just going to fast forward through the rest of this. On the topic of God, I like to read a lot. I read a lot about philosophy. My favorite one is Stoicism. And it's a Greek or Roman belief that humans were created half animal, half in the image of God. And all that sets a human aside from a wild animal is the ability to reason, the ability to judge, to consider, to try to improve, to really think about the human condition. What does it mean to be a human?
Right.
Dogs don't think, what does it mean to be a dog?
Well, they think they're human, but okay.
And that's where the spiritual principles, again, come in handy. Because animals aren't capable of living by spiritual principles. For instance, honesty. Well, is an animal capable of being honest, but like an animal's not capable of being dishonest. A human's capable of being dishonest. So what am I doing with my human right, my ability to be human?
I love that.
What am I doing as far as spiritual principles? Am I
Right.
being honest? Am I
Right.
being of service to other people? Am I being open-minded? Am I constantly trying to look for the better version of myself?
Right.
Because that's what I've learned over sobriety. That's what my life is comprised of. I'm a man that's set to find the best version of himself.
Right.
And having the program with me, working the steps, applying the steps to everything is what leads me to that. Because every relapse I had was because something major and adverse happened in my life. My parents died. There were issues with my ex-wife's and I's pregnancy. I had health issues. All negative things that I was closed-minded to it. I didn't want to hear any of what anybody had to say, and it broke me. I used to look at those as reasons, but in essence, they're not reasons, they're excuses. There's only one reason why I relapsed 3 times, and it's because I never applied a program of recovery to my life.
Right.
Applying that to anything that happens now, and it's usually adverse events. Like, in June of this year, I was diagnosed with stage 3 testicular cancer. Naturally, that's going to reinforce my belief that there's not a loving God looking after me. And again, I'm not trying to look down on anybody's opinions. It's just looking back at my life events. There's much more evidence that there's not a loving God.
If one can
looking after
take
me.
the interpretation of that based on that, one can definitely go in that direction with that.
Right.
Yes.
So I look at it and throw in heartbreaks, failed relationships, issues dealing with my ex-wife, anything adverse. And as long as I apply the spiritual principles to it, I stay honest. If I stay honest, I don't have to worry about what I said. I don't feel that guilt of having said something I shouldn't have. Open-mindedness. I can learn something from this, either to prevent me from doing it again or to become a better person at the end of it, help somebody else get through it.
Yeah.
And as long as I apply those principles to whatever I'm going through, the end result is a better version of myself.
Now, do you feel like, because you know you are a good person, but it's more like there's an energy about you too, and a lot of people are attracted to you, how your mind works, how you are, how you want to be helpful, how focused you are, how articulate you could be, and you have a lot of people who care about you. And so when this was happening, you had a lot of people wanting to be there, you know, and to, whether they were physically there or not, you know, keep maybe some people who even, you know, prayed. I'm not saying that did the
Right.
whatever, but I'm just saying that the sincere desire to want your highest good, you
Right.
know, and to have that kind of energy and consciousness, you know, around you. Do you feel like that was also helpful in this as well?
Absolutely, because it comes down to step one. I couldn't have done this alone.
Yeah.
But to your point about like the way people view me, people's perspective of me, and this might sound a little counterintuitive, but the St. Francis prayer, removing the religious component from it, I try to live the St. Francis
Seeking
prayer.
to understand rather
Right.
than be understood.
Right.
Right.
Just boiling all that down to the following statement. I try to be the difference in the lives of other people that I want others to be in mine.
Yeah.
And while I know it's probably not going to happen, I just know that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because at the end of every day, it comes down to what does it mean to be human. It's a privilege to be a human. I mean, we're all born human, obviously, but it's a gift to be human. What am I doing with that gift?
Right.
Am I trying to make my own life better for selfish reasons, or am I trying to help other people build?
Yeah.
I try to make it so that my presence in somebody's life is positive, not negative. Because I fully believe and accept that. I went through everything that I went through, divorce, debts, my own personal battles, so that I can encounter somebody else going through it and help them get through it.
And so in that case, you could say that everything happened for a reason.
I guess so. But that's the reason. We know what the reason is.
Oh, that's beautiful. And so where are you at with the cancer? What ended up happening from that so far?
My initial CT scans were showing something on my lymph nodes. They didn't know what it was, so I had to go in for a PET scan. And it was determined that my condition is stable and that it's probably just scar tissue.
Okay. Wow. I'm glad you're doing better. It was a little hard watching you go through that,
Yeah.
but man, and interesting at the same time, you know. So when I first was truly wanting to have a spiritual solution, and even in my childhood, I had an atheist father, and who was extremely intelligent, and I had a mother who was everybody was Jewish, but my mother was Jewish for show. I felt that's my opinion. Take what you like, but I felt like everybody was miserable. And my mom took me to some 12-step programs,
Right.
you know, for her own whatevers. And I just felt like there's no, if God was mentioned, it was never mentioned in alignment with any kind of solution to this. And my dad believed that God was a crutch. And I just had this intuition, this awareness, but I lived with my face in books, and I was isolated as a child and didn't have friends. And so it was, I was very much soul searching. I was very much trying to understand what to me was ununderstandable. The childhood I had, the abuse, all the stuff that I went through. And well into my recovery, I could not call God God. I had so much crap in it, so much energy, so much confusion that I couldn't handle that word. And so when I would even try to use the word God, even though I was Jewish, a hell and damnation God, because of all the abandonment, because I made my parents higher powers when I was a kid, and all the abuse, like I had to work through so much stuff to get to a place where, for me, some people do, some people don't end up taking back the word. I ended up taking back the word. I sometimes call it God, and oftentimes I call it different things. And but I ended up getting to a place where I redefined it, and it took a lot of years to get to a place where if I use the word God and somebody else uses the word God, and there could be a whole room full of people using the word God, and I promise you, everybody has a completely different story about what they're hearing. So sometimes I just tune in to who I'm speaking to and just speak in the language, because it's all the same at the level of the gut. It's all the same to me at the level of intuition. And so people are either doing what they feel is the next right step, or they're doing what they feel is the, yeah, but I'll just do this. And, you know, we have a lot of shows that show we can incrementally get worse, so we can incrementally get better. And so I'm really grateful for you coming on the show and sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us.
I appreciate that.
So-
Thank you for having me. Can I
Yeah.
just summarize one thing real quick?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. at least my story, and I know this is common with a lot of people in the programs, like our disease stems from trauma, abuse, adversity, essentially. And one thing I've learned in the last 3 years plus, there has not been one single problem that life has thrown at me that the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous have not been able to solve for me. At first, it was a divorce. It was losing my house. It was losing custody of my child. It was losing my job, which in essence are prerequisites to becoming a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The point that I'm getting at is that I didn't walk through that alone, because there were how many people in the room who went through that before I did.
Right.
And they showed me exactly how to do that without getting drunk or high.
Right.
Same thing with cancer. Same thing with any relationship ending. Any issue in my life has been solved by the people of Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. In essence, that is what my higher power is, because the collective wisdom and power of 2 people is much greater than 1. Now, you factor in a room full of 25 people, a support system of 100 people. The amount of power behind that is immeasurable.
Yeah. The collective consciousness. Do you have any intention of doing a meeting again for the 12 secular steps?
Yes. The reason why we stopped doing that is because my sponsor went out of town for a while, and that was when I first got cancer.
Yeah.
So we intend on bringing it back.
Okay,
Yes.
it would be wonderful to have it back at the meeting space. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate and love you very much.
Thank you.
And
Love
thank
you
you
too.
for joining us today on the Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio here in Las Vegas. See you next week.